everyone I speak to is really worried that what we're experiencing is something without a clear conclusion, or at least the post office have got a conclusion and they're not really listening to what people are saying.
Is it a foregone conclusion, do you feel?
That's what people are thinking, yeah. The way it's been timetabled, there's no real solution possible in the minds of some people, and it's one of the questions I'm going to be putting to Miss Edge tomorrow in terms of when the consultation finishes and when the sub-postmaster retires. There's such a short period of time. How can this really be taking place as it is?
We heard from Laurie Hooper, MHK, who basically said that he and several other members of Tynwald kind of knew this would happen or expected this would happen when they voted through the retail strategy from the Isle of Man Post Office Board. Do you agree with those comments?
Yeah,
was this predictable?
Definitely. When we actually looked at what was on the table in October, there was real concerns. I'm on the Economic Policy Review Committee, and we actually did a separate report looking at possibilities for the Post Office. And we were hopeful that what would come forward would be some solution based on a retail strategy. But the solution that basically came through was looking at the core business, the delivery section, and forgetting about the sub-post offices. And really, as Laura Hooper suggested, this is really what we foresaw coming.
How about the consultation process that the Post Office Board has issued, I guess, to seek feedback from members of the public? I mentioned there have been these 2 public meetings. So it seems like there's a concerted effort to try and take the views of constituents on board.
They have been movable from the point of view that they came in initially and said the consultation will finish on the 17th of January. That's it. They did extend it forward to the 24th. They've got a situation where they've been prepared to come down and talk to people at a coffee morning. They've done the evening question and answer session. And they do appear to be listening, but the problem is there a timetable that will allow a realistic, good solution for the people of Malew?
Looking through some of your questions, though, they don't all relate just to Ballasalla. You're asking the Chief Minister, for example, whether the Council of Ministers has discussed the potential closure of all sub-post office branches during the next 5 years. Do you believe that's a realistic possibility?
Yeah, I do. If you actually look at the main post offices in Ramsey and Douglas, they're coming up for renegotiation again. You've got an age profile that's suggesting that a lot of the sub-postmasters are going to be retiring or looking at retiring in the next 5 years. And the way in which we've got a situation where we've gone from we'll wait for the report to come out, the strategy, and then we'll look at whether we'll advertise posts. And now we've got a position where they're unclear on whether they can advertise a post in terms of the viability of the business. So if we go forward and we get retirements, we get issues in terms of new contracts, and those positions aren't re-advertised, then it's quite conceivable that by the end of the next Parliament, all the post offices could have closed.
The Isle of Man Post Office Board's strategy and recommendations were voted through in Tynwald, of course. So does that give the board a mandate, do you feel, to act in the way it is doing?
I feel that they can interpret the approval as a sign that they can go forward making the decisions which they feel are right. The issue is that when it comes back to the members of Tynwald, they're looking at the wider issues, they're looking at the social impact. And I think that's something that's going to come through tomorrow. In terms of these sub-post office closures, there's wider concerns. And when I'm asking the Chief Minister, when I'm asking the Minister for Policy and Reform, when I'm asking the Minister for Enterprise, it's all about actually what the impact will be on the individual. And there are a lot of elderly people who choose to have the pensions paid at the sub-post office in Ballasalla, over 170 of them every week, who are going there. It's something that's part of their routine, something they rely on.
You mentioned your question to the Minister for Policy and Reform, Chris Thomas. You're asking him what discussions have been held with the Post Office about the branches becoming mini welcome centres. What would they look like?
The reason I asked that question is there was a question and answer session earlier in the year, and the Policy Reform Minister did suggest that the welcome centres could actually play a part in a wider island initiative.
So are we talking about the Welcome Centre down at the sea terminal?
Yeah.
So something that would look similar to that?
Yeah, in terms of tourist information, in terms of selling local produce, in terms of just being more dynamic and bringing new things into the post office.
You've also mentioned, finally, about the post office. You're asking the chairman why the role of sub-postmaster has not been advertised since 2016. So before that, was it something that was regularly advertised?
Yeah, it was a standard process that once the position became available, the advertisement was placed in the paper. People had the opportunity to go forward with their ideas and get chosen. It was quite an attractive proposition. We've now got a situation where, since the Laxey role was taken on, we've had 2 post offices that have closed. We've now got the question mark over Ballasalla. I've got a real serious issue in terms of, are we ever going to see another sub-postmaster being advertised on the island?
Lots of your questions are for the chairman of the post office, Miss Edge. Does she have the power to alter some of this decision making, or actually does it lie at the door of Treasury?
I think when it comes down to the post office, it's actually run as a separate entity, and as chair of the post office, Miss Edge seems to be talking a very similar language to the CEO and the board, and it seems to be a unified policy. And presumably, if this is a policy they've come up with, then they can work together to come up with a solution. It's not a dramatic change I'm wanting. I'm just basically saying to them, can we go out looking for expressions of interest and see if there actually is the demand to take on this role? There appears to be people who said they're interested, but unless you're going to test the market, we're just playing around and getting nowhere and worrying a lot of people.
On a separate note, you're also asking some questions, 3 relating to education and relating to teaching. You're a former teacher, of course, so this is an area of interest for you. Tell us a bit about your questions for the Education Minister, if you could.
In terms of the questions for the Education Minister, it's really building on what I was asking towards the end of last year in terms of the incentives that are offered for teachers who come to the island. They don't seem to be offered in an equal manner. If people have actually had a residence on the island, if they've been students from the island, they aren't qualifying for all the incentives to come back here and work here. And what I'm trying to drill down to is how many of the local students who've decided to come back are now feeling slightly like second-class citizens because they're not being offered incentives to encourage them to buy houses and put down roots again and stay on the island. I'm aware of 2 people who've come back to the island. They're living their jobs, but they feel kind of, are we going to be here for long term? We would potentially be liking to buy a house and have our families here, but if it's not something that the department's prepared to support, really should we be looking at staying? And it's creating uncertainty. And I've asked really for the number of people involved, and once we know the number of people involved, we can look at the cost, and the cost is probably going to be quite minimal. We're looking at £200 a month over a 2-year period, so it's a small amount over a short period of time, and I think all teachers should have that same opportunity. If they choose to come and work on the island, whether they've been resident here or not previously, it's a new start, it's a new position, and they should be offered those incentives.
Representatives of teachers' unions on the island have told me that the number of applicants per vacancy is under 3 recently. In previous years, it was between 5 and 9, and then overseas, sometimes it's as many as 20, 30 or more. Is that evidence that we're struggling to attract teachers, do you think? And if so, what should government be doing to try and reverse that trend?
There's definitely an impact in terms of if you've got a smaller number of applicants, then the choice you make are going to be restricted. So we need to make sure we're actually offering the support, the incentives, the environment in which to teach.
And what support and incentives would you like to see then that aren't already in place?
Well, I think in terms of putting those forward, it's difficult at the moment when the unions are putting forward their ideas in the education department or look at solutions. So for me to bulldoze in and say A, B and C isn't really appropriate, but I do think the education department needs to be looking at what is realistic, what options should be placed on the table, not in a abnormally generous manner, but just to actually look at playing fair and ensuring that we do get a talent pool that is going to benefit our future generations of children.
But it's not just recruitment, it's retention as well, isn't it? And lots of young teachers, we're told, are choosing to pursue other careers at some point rather than remaining as teachers, some of them becoming MHKs, for example. So it's not just for new starters.
That's true. Career paths do change. A lot of people who get to middle age and older decide, they want to do something slightly different in their lives, and teaching has attractions, and a lot of those people go back into the classroom or into the classroom for the first time. So definitely it's something that people look at all ages, and I think the education department needs to be aware of that and really consider that. There is a talent pool out there. People want to teach in island schools, and it needs to be made attractive propositions for them to do that.
Just finally, of one last question. You're asking the Minister for Policy and Reform how many people applied through immigration channels for citizenship in each of the last 5 years, where they previously lived, and what their place of birth was. What's this been sparked by?
It was really follow-up to a question I asked in early December about the population growth. And as part of the answer, there was the suggestion that immigration was coming from wider than the normal channels, wider from just the UK. And so I was thinking, in terms of where people are coming from, let's get a few answers. Let's get some facts and figures on the table. And so it's a straightforward written question, and hopefully it'll give us some idea of which areas of the world are seeing the Isle of Man as the place to be, the place to live and work.